Hello, we're going to start early, or actually right on time, because we got a full schedule. So everyone will take their seats. Good afternoon. My name is Don Jennings. I'm the president of South Brevard Historical Society. Can you all hear me in the back? Wiley? You're good? Okay. Before we begin, I would like to mention the passing of one of our longtime members. Frank Perkins of West Melbourne passed away September 15th at Holmes Regional Medical Center. Born on December 17, 1929, Frank witnessed firsthand what many of us youngsters read about. Frank moved to Melbourne in 1955, first working for RCA at Patrick Air Force Base as an engineer on their radar tracking systems. In 1959, he went to work for Radiation Incorporated and then worked for its successor, Harris Corporation, until his retirement in 1988. Frank was well known for his efforts to tell the story of the radiators. His dedication was a guide to many of us who worked to preserve artifacts and their associated stories. Thanks to Frank's efforts, including getting many of his fellow radiators to FIT, the manuals, photographs, and correspondences are now housed in the Radiation Inc. archives at Florida Tech's Evans Library. Frank will be missed. Next is an announcement for Green Gables. Green Gables will have a haunted happy hour. It's scheduled for Saturday, October 21st from 4 p.m. to dusk. They're going to have live music from blues singer Georgia Randall, fortunes told by Maria Bonwell, ghoulish libations, and storytelling by Bard Light, and costumes are encouraged. All right. Today we are fortunate to have two speakers to talk about the Indian River. Charlie Sembler will spend the first 30 minutes talking about how it was vital to the early settlers. Following Charlie will be Virginia Barker, who will talk about current efforts to restore its ecology. Before Charlie comes up, I'd like to first read you both their bios. So first, Charlie is a fifth-generation Floridian. He is part of a pioneer family that landed in the Sebastian area back in the late 1800s. Charlie grew up along the shores of the Indian River Lagoon, working at the family's commercial fish house, which was founded in 1901. The family business is still in operation today, with efforts focused on shellfish aquaculture. Charlie has served on the Sebastian Inlet Commission in the Florida House of Representatives and as the Indian River tax collector. Today, he is self-employed and operates several family businesses and is considered a seasoned waterman and an old salt when it comes to matters pertaining to the Indian River Lagoon. His historical knowledge, gleaned from countless hours spent listening to the old-timers reminisce, coupled with his own personal experiences, make him an outstanding resource when it comes to matters pertaining to the river. Virginia Barker is the Director of Natural Resources Management. She has been with Brevard County government for over 19 years in a variety of roles with the natural resources, including the county's beach management program, stormwater utility program, and numerous other environmental initiatives. Before taking on the role as director, Virginia was the watershed program manager, supervising staff, consultant, and contractors to prepare and implement innovative, comprehensive, and scientifically based environmental regulations, management, and master plans. Her efforts have been repeatedly recognized through the awards from local and state organizations, as well as the U.S. Corps of Engineers. Virginia earned a Master's of Environmental Management degree from Duke University. So please help me welcome Charlie, who will lead us first on the history of the river.
Can you hear me? Can you hear me all right? Thank you, Charlie. Well, listen, when I was invited, I first of all don't do much of this anymore because I'm kind of enjoying not having to be in the public light. But when Barbara Arthur asks you to do something, she asks you in a certain way where she's not really asking you, she's really sort of telling you. And then when I walked in here today, my brother-in-law's here, my sister-in-law's here, I got nieces and nephews here, and I got my first grade teacher, Diane Burrell, here today. So I came all prepared to tell y'all a good pirate story and a good tale. but I guess I'm gonna have to tell the truth. So, well, anyway, what I'd like to do is try to maybe tell you a little bit about the old days, when my great-great-grandfather got here. Some of the areas they fished, some of the things that they were able to see, and how the river's changed over the years. And then I want to give you kind of a couple of why those things have happened and why things have evolved the way they have. Well, first of all, the Indian River, about 156 miles long, encompasses 5 counties. From Volusia to Jupiter, everybody has a unique set of problems. But Brevard, you're about what, 72 miles long, somewhere in there? You've got a little under half the whole Indian River. So you have quite a task and an undertaking that you're trying to deal with. You've probably read in the paper, and you've probably seen in the press, that the St. Lucie River and the St. Lucie River area gets all the attention with the Everglades. I can tell you that St. Lucie River and what they're trying to do there is literally polar opposites of what we're trying to do here. They're trying to gather all of their input through the St. Lucie River and through the Closahatchee River that flows to the west, and they're trying to push all that through the natural flowway to the south. Their problems, although they are monumental in scale and in size, they are much different than the Indian River that we know in Brevard and Indian River counties. The Brevard and Indian River County area is a little unique because we have in Sebastian Inlet from there north, we don't have any more inlets. So from the Sebastian Inlet south, the southern Indian River County boundary, we have a small little inlet here that you see right here that has relatively a low flow rate when it exchanges compared to the St. Lucie Inlet. St. Lucie Inlet exchanges trillions of gallons of water each and every day. Where the Sebastian Inlet, we're in the billions of gallons of water, and that's a big difference. And the next place you get to in Brevard is Port Canaveral in the locks. Now, I have read through my great-grandfather's journals, and it was very interesting to see that in the early 20s and the 30s, as unique and wild as this whole area was, the Indian River, there's one place in particular that he would underscore and talk about in great detail. And it probably, back in its heyday, was probably acre for acre the most productive marine section in an estuary anywhere that you're going to find in the northern hemisphere. And that was the Banana River. And let me get you to jump up to the Banana River. We're going to start up there if we can, and that's where I'd kind of like to start. I don't know if your area kind of goes as far what you're interested in, but I think it's pretty interesting for you to see. The Banana River, as you all know, kind of starts down here at the end of Dragon Point, and that's Dragon Point, and then goes northward through the bottom of Merritt Island, and this area is the Banana River. Goes north, 520, 528, NASA Causeway. Keep going north if you will. Uh-oh.
I'm glad you're driving.
Well, anyway, I'll let him try to get it back, but it goes north to the NASA Causeway, and then what the Banana River did was it hooked around, and it was called the Banana Creek. The Banana Creek was the section, I know you're all familiar with the vehicle assembly building, where they do the shuttle. They have basically mount the shuttle to the crawler assembly vehicle. The Banana Creek came along and it hooked and it went north, and then it came back south, and then it went over there eventually into the Indian River. Now, when my great-great-grandfather got here, you have to remember, you didn't have any causeway there. There were no causeway, no causeways, period. You didn't have NASA there. You didn't have the mosquito impoundments there. Keep on going there north, if you will. Keep going north, keep going north, keep going right on up there. And right here, and this shuttle pad right here is where our old duck hunting camp used to be. Titusville ran, back in those days in the late 1800s, of course hunting and fishing was a big deal. Titusville ran what was East Coast renowned, a hunting and fishing sporting opportunity. And the Banana River and what is now the Merritt Island National Wildlife Refuge was the grounds where most of that went on. He would talk about things in his particular journal about, and I think the quote was, he said, "I've never seen ducks black out the sun." You've heard people talk about this. But he said, "I've probably seen 1 million ducks in the air at one time." Now you think about that for a minute. Now, this particular area, and a large reason why it was up there, you have to remember that if you look at Florida, can you zoom out? And we kind of get a zoom out. If you look at Florida, can anybody kind of take a guess and tell me, why is this bump here like this? Anybody want to take a shot at it? Anybody know?
Currents,
What's that?
flow of water.
Water, but what else? What geography, what geophysical difference would make that bump like that? Make it stick out. Rock, Coquina rock. Hence the word rock ledge and the southern point right here. This rock and this vein of rock, the Coquina rock that was in this particular area, if you look at this particular area in these strands, and you've always probably read about why Merritt Island, North Merritt Island as a whole has been just an anomaly when it comes to citrus, mangroves, tropical fruits, things like that. But what you have to remember is when you have that amount of rock, Coquina rock, calcium carbonate that's in everything in the marine environment is like a supercharged substance that basically Merritt Island is built on top of. And back in the old days, number one, you had all that Coquina rock where you had the trees. Every time you had a rise and fall in tide, the ground would hydrate and then the water would retreat. And the ground would hydrate and the water would retreat. And a telltale sign that you can go in there when you see mango trees, old mango trees, 100-year-old mango trees that are 36 inches in diameter, and you see live oak trees that are 200 or 300 years old when they're 40 inches and 48 inches, and limbs on them 20 feet off the ground are 36 inches. There's a reason for that, and it's what's underneath them in the soil. And you can take those particular areas and directly attribute that to the soil and the minerals and the calcium carbonate that erodes because it's soft over time, especially on the Merritt Island area. But the other side of that is you had shallow face. You didn't have reefs like you would think, like a big coral reef, the Great Reef, or reefs you'd see in the Keys. They were very shallow faced, most of them between 2 and 5 feet tall, but they were very soft and they would erode over time. Now you got to remember, this has happened over thousands and thousands and thousands of years that this ecosystem developed into the most productive ecosystem that you're going to probably find anywhere, especially in the Banana River. And in the Banana River, these ecosystems and these Coquina reefs attributed a great deal in the early days, according to his journal, of why you would have blue crabs. You've heard about the blue crabs, but blue crabs that were not only in great numbers, but excessive in size. In other words, almost like an anomaly. Brown grass shrimp. Brown grass shrimp, when you would wade through the water in his journals, he said it was nothing to have 100 and 200 and 300 brown grass shrimp jump out of the shallow water in front of you. This place is renowned for widgeon grass, some of the best widgeon grass colonies all back in those days that were in the Indian River. Star grass that is very prominent in Merritt Island. So all these things that kind of had going for it that were just things that were just such a great natural resource was really, words can't describe it adequately, but according to the journals and the few pictures that are there, it was something that is hard to believe. It's kind of like when they talk about buffalo in the Dakotas, and it was like you couldn't see a buffalo or two buffalo. It was almost like there may have been a tree, but the ground just kind of all blended together and the ground moved. That's the kind of populations you had with fish. You didn't measure them. If you remember seeing maybe on TV, National Geographic, you've seen bait balls where you've had tuna fish or sailfish, corral bait balls, and you've seen how thick they are. Multiply that by times 1,000 and there's acres of them, of like mullet and things like that. So those were the types of things that they were able to see that I've seen a little bit in my lifetime, but not very much. So as time goes on and things start to happen, this area was very, very popular. The Indian River, within its own right, had a very good population. There's still some Coquina. The last Coquina reef that I think you can still see today is right off of Pine Island. There's a place here called Rinker's Canal, a little place right there. If any of your boaters, if you ever go in here, there's a couple little places right up in here that you can still find some of those Coquina reefs. And they're only as tall as this, and they're kind of in there and they're kind of hidden. You can look, but that's probably the last of them. The rest of them have been either filled in over time, or if we can jump back to the Banana River, this is where most of the things that started to happen went south. Go back up towards the VAB, if you will. Along comes, and this went on for 40, 50 years with basically no human intrusion at all, other than duck hunters and commercial fishermen. Along comes the federal government, and the NASA program and the space race. And the first things that were done out here were tracking stations down here to the south. Now the lighthouse had been there the whole time. That was basically the last of it. The lighthouse is right about in there, right close to there. But it was noted in his notes, the beginning of the end, and now mind you, we're going back to the 60s, of when the tracking stations in the Air Force, the Army Air Corps, started coming in here and doing some things. The Army Air Corps came in. Have you ever heard of the bombing targets that have been in the Banana River? There's 3 of them. There's one right here north of the VAB. Maybe go up here. I don't know if any of you have ever seen the bombing targets. But you see this area? That's the Banana Creek area. And what it was in the old days, this Banana Creek area, you see the edge of this shoreline? You see the edge of this shoreline? This was all open. All of this right here where the transport goes to the launch pads, none of this was there. It was all gone. So if you imagine an artery, and you take and you plug the artery to 99%, what's going to happen? It's going to change things. It's going to change things. So right here where the main artery used to come through, where it basically splits to go to launch pad A, launch pad B, right here is where the historic Banana River proper used to come through, and all this wetland area and all these mosquito ditches and banks that you see in here, all this wasn't here. So this whole flowway was a shallow, warm estuarine, grass-filled, ducks, shrimp, crabs, crustaceans, in overwhelming numbers. Go back over here, if you will, right in here, and I want you to see where the Banana Creek used to come through. Just kind of follow it. Follow it. Banana Creek used to, that's the VAB. Banana Creek came right through here and then back to the Indian River. Now, this is the Indian River, Indian River proper over here. So I want you to see, go back over here if you will, another VAB, and I want you to focus in right here. So remember the artery I was telling you about and the water flow? Focus in right there. Now mind you, the creek used to be this way. It was hundreds of feet wide, and focus in right here. Keep focusing. Keep focusing. Right. Can you see that little bitty teeny tiny culvert right there? See that little bitty culvert right there? Now how's that water going to move around the Banana River like it used to by wind and tide? That's what pushed it. Not pumps pushing it, an inlet, wind and tide pushed it. So this, when that started to take place, back then, the hunters and fishermen were astute enough and they could identify, because that's how many of them made their living and what they did for enjoyment. A lot of it was observation, looking at birds, looking at fish, looking at porpoise, looking at things and figuring out what they were doing. And the big thing is, and the big question to all this is being able to, number one, see what's happening, and then answer the question of why is it happening. So when you take the Indian River and the Banana Creek that hooks to the Indian River and comes around north, go ahead and zoom back out, and then comes down through its traditional flowway, and it comes around and it comes through the crawlerway, and then it comes south where this was the primary fishing grounds, hunting grounds. This is where the grass, all the shrimp was, and then you've restricted it down to basically where you've got a clog in the artery here, you got a complete clog here, and then this NASA causeway. I want you to focus in right there. Mind you, I want you to look and see how wide historically it was from here all the way back over to here. So I want you to focus. You see that little bitty cut right there? That's all the water that can move through the NASA causeway that moves through the Banana River right now. Now all this This wasn't on Brevard County's problem. This was the federal government. Not pointing any fingers right, wrong, or different. It is what it is. But when you take probably the most productive, and you can talk to the old timers way older than me, and they will tell you hands down to the person that the Banana River was like nothing they'd ever seen when they were young men and they were young women, and just the amount of fish that used to be in it. So that was kind of the beginning and the start of the end. Now all this is closed now, it's closed to public access, but you take all this nursery ground, all this historic productive ground, and you haven't completely taken it out of service and out of production, but you've taken 99% of it out of production compared to what it could be doing today. So let's just start going south here a little bit if we can. Then along comes development, and along comes the Cape and the development of the port. Along comes causeways instead of the old bridges that were there. And remember the artery that I was telling you about? So every time you put in a causeway and you plug it up, you start to create a problem. The reason they did causeways was pretty obvious. It's cheap. All you got to do is you go out of here and you throw a dredge, and you stick a dredge in there and you pump up fill. So as you continue south, kind of continue south right here, then at the same time, Florida kind of gets discovered. And it gets discovered, and all this that used to be green, now you're starting to see asphalt, you're starting to see shingles, and you're starting to see white. Now most of these areas over here were developed in the old days prior to water retention rules. And water retention rules in a nutshell is if you go in and you develop a tract of land, you've got to retain the amount of surface water that would be coming off any non-porous surface, asphalt, shingles, roof, tin roof, parking lots, things like that, and you've got to be able to retain that water. Really great concept because we don't want any pollutants running off, but there's a problem with that. These historical watersheds that you had right here where this water would migrate into the river, now what you've done, instead of having those, you don't have any water retention in these older developments. So you've got all those pollutants and you've captured them at one time, and now you're sending them directly into the Indian River and Banana River in those places, but you're sending them into it real quick. I'm going to talk about something real quickly called the time travel of water. What the time travel of water is when it rains historically in a green area, wet area, it could have been west of town, could have been on the watershed on the main island, could have been on Merritt Island. In the old days, the time travel, it took it time to wander through the wetlands or wander through the ditches that had vegetation in them, and it took them a little bit of time for that water to move. And what happened was that was ample enough time where a couple things happened. The suspended solids from washing across the surface would have time to settle out. The vegetation in the ditches, a lot of times, water hyacinths, water lilies, water lettuce, acts as an uptake to take nutrients, to take phosphorus and nitrous out. So instead of that happening now you're taking that amount of water and you're having a concentrated, untreated amount of surface water, and now it's being funneled directly into the river where historically it wasn't. And like I say, when you go back in time, you go back to the 30s and 40s and 50s, you got a couple of homesteads here, you got a couple of homesteads here, a couple of homesteads here. The river was big enough where it had enough, for lack of a better term, and an analogy, white blood cells that would act is a function where it would take care of that problem, and it could absorb it and it could treat it itself through natural processes. Now you're dealing with straight concentrate. So that particular problem was noticed and it was brought to people's attention, and the legislature and water management district said, look, we got to start capturing some of this water. Problem is you get in an area like this with all this place already developed where you're not capturing that water, it's almost too little too late. But if you do capture the water, getting those nutrients and getting those things out of it is a great thing to do, but now it presents another issue. An estuary in itself is defined as a mix of fresh and salt. And when you have an imbalance in that fresh and salt, you have a consequence to it. And for instance, especially during the winter months and the summer months, you have a great variety of rainfall. You have the dry season, and summer months you have the wet season. How many people think 1 or 2 degrees or 3 degrees in temperature is a big deal in the river? A couple people? Yeah. Let me ask you, when you have a temperature of 1 or 2 or 3 degrees, is it a big deal?
Yeah.
3 degrees is almost debilitating, where you don't even want to get out of bed. So the point is that it's kind of like when you get a rain, you have your pool, and as you've been hot, you get your rain, you get a little afternoon rain, you jump in the pool, you notice it's cool right away. So those fluctuations with what rainwater you're having and the amount that it's putting into the Indian River in a rapid fashion instead of the traditional fashion where it basically trickled in, where it kept the chemical, the biological, and the other things in somewhat of a balance, now you've started to alter that balance. So what I'm trying to do is explain there's lots of different things that have gone on literally started, decades ago that maybe a lot of people weren't here and had the benefit of seeing. But the point I wanted to underscore is most folks in the public that you've been seeing on the Indian River issues, like in the South, it's really easy to say, and this is kind of how it's been couched with the Everglades issue and things like that, it's really easy to say, there's the bad guy and it's his fault. Why? Because it's quick, crisp, clean, easy to understand. When you start talking about things like this, there are literally hundreds of major issues, cumulative over decades in time, that each and every year, once things start to change, it changes, not dramatically, but it changes just a little bit. Just a little bit. Just a little bit. And it's almost like when you're sick. You don't feel good, and then you get up that morning, and then all of a sudden you feel like, I need to go to the hospital. And that's kind of the point that we have when we have the algae blooms. The little bit, and the little bit, and the little bit, and the little bit, it kind of caught up with us. And then it was kind of like, bang, it couldn't absorb anymore, it couldn't take anymore. And that's basically the analogy of what's happened. So let's go a little bit further south if we can. You have areas where you have, let's go over here to the mainland real quick if we can. Now I want to show you just the difference when you start looking at this, and this is the great thing about Google Earth. You have the old subdivisions like you see in Rockledge. See the old subdivisions? How many of these little ponds do you see, any little water retention areas? There's a couple in here. And then you have the new ones, look here. They're everywhere. So now the idea is, how do we take this water and how do we get it into there, and how do we get it, number one, pulsed over a period of time where it naturally can come in there and try to keep the balance as close as possible. Two, keep it clean where you've removed most of the nitrogen, phosphorus, the hydrocarbons that run off the road, ethylene glycol that comes out of it, copper, lead, and all the other things that come off the public surface road systems. How do you do that and convey that? And the big question is how do you do it cheap? There is no easy answer. And that's the predicament and that's the dilemma that we're in right now today. You folks in Brevard County and the residents were very, I believe, wise and lucky to be able to pass the bond issue, to be able to help your county do some things. I can tell you, I used to be in the legislature when I was a young guy, way back when. I can't even remember how far. But I can tell you that battles such as the Everglades, and if you know the battles that you've been reading about that, you've read about the battles and how hard it is for them just to get $1 billion. $1 billion Everglades, it's world renowned, the problems are worldly known, and it's a big problem. You need more than $1 billion here. You need a lot more than $1 billion here to even start. And the complicated process of getting individuals in the legislative arena that can do that is going to be your challenge. I can tell you that Brevard County, probably of all the counties, is ahead of the curve. You're putting your money where your mouth is. You got Virginia Barker up there, who's really a great lady. She's smart. She's on top of her game. She doesn't know this yet. She doesn't know I'm going to say it. But I've been asked by a gubernatorial candidate that I'm trying to advise and help on some of these Indian River issues. And they said, if you had to pick a person to be and put in charge of this and I were to make it, who would it be? And I said, one person hands down. I said, you need to get Virginia Barker. I said, because this issue is so big, you need somebody full-time to focus on nothing but this. It's got so many places and parts and so many moving parts. You've got so many cities, counties, you've got so many drainage districts that are independent districts, and then you've got the big one, you've got St. John's. And that's where I want to kind of wrap this up because I know my time's starting to run short. All these little areas in the creeks that you see, Crane Creek, Turkey Creek, Goat Creek, go right on down the list, Trout Creek, the Sebastian River, the St. John's, and there again, not slighting anybody, but they spent a couple of decades creating the St. John's, the Upper St. John's Water Management Restoration Project, and that's where they basically built a berm around it to try to save that water and it gets pushed north. All this effort that you're going through here, none of it's going to work unless you get a historical flow and allocation of fresh water to put back in this lagoon under the guise and circumstances and the schedule that I'm telling you. The problem is people from Orlando North want cheap, potable, on-demand water, and they want it right now. And quite frankly, some of their concern of what you're facing in the Indian River, living in Orange Park or somewhere like that, or Jacksonville, may not be as big a concern to them. So what I'm telling you is there's big political battles out there. A lot of that water that historically used to go into here no longer goes in here. A lot of that water was part of the project that sends that water north now, and that would, when it was being developed, you have to keep in mind that you know, people had land that was purchased from them. People had land that was purchased from them through force, through eminent domain. You had court cases, you had judgments, you had fines. It was all based on a narrative of this is why we need it. And I can tell you now that we need to come up with some more young people, and it will take them a decade or two to turn it around and say, no, you may need it, but this is how much we need back, and this is why. And the perfect example I'm going to give you is the Kissimmee River. 1940s came along and said, you know what, this river's winding like this, and we need to drain this and do all these things. 1950s, what they do, they popped a chalk line from Orlando to Lake Okeechobee. What they do, they cut it and drain it. And guess what we spent the last 20 years doing? Filling it in to make it like it used to be. So what I'm telling you is, there again, not to complicate it or, you know, keep piling on more headaches like, are we ever going to get there? There are issues in this that are huge, they're complex, they involve a great deal of money. The politics in it over drinking water, there's probably no more volatile issue that we're going to face as far as trying to get back a historical flow and level allocation, along with all the other little things that are being done. Real quick to wrap up though, what you're doing in Brevard County with your money, it is a great thing. Probably one of the best things that you could be doing immediately is trying to get what septic tanks are out there online to a sewer system. That's a great start. But even that in itself is unbelievably expensive. I tried to encourage the folks in an Indian River County where you run parallel tracks. We tried to break it down and look where we do a project that takes from a year to 2 years, a short-term project, a medium-term project from 3 years to maybe 5 or 6 years, and then have projects where they're 6 years and they could take 20 years. But when you do that and you're running parallel tracks on multiple different fronts and you're achieving efficiencies on multiple different levels, people can see that you're spending money and doing something. Rather it be building little reefs here, it could be doing baffle boxes, it could be taking these creeks where they're doing a lot of dredging in some of these creeks. Crane Creek, Turkey Creek, Coquina River, and that's really well and good. But unless you go upstream from the creek, and you kind of, somebody looks around and says, put the flag in the ground and says, here's the point source and where it's coming from, and unless you stop it and fix it there, you're going to be right back down there in 15 years doing the same thing again. And like I say, with that comes with money, it comes with time, it's very expensive. You've got to pump that stuff somewhere and put it in somebody's backyard until it dries to haul it off. So there again, the complexities and what you're dealing with here hasn't happened overnight. It's happened over 50, 60 years, but it has rapidly advanced and happened so fast over the last 30 years just due to basically one big issue, and that's coastal development. Everything that I just talked about to you, every single thing, you can trace back and tie it to the word and definition of coastal development. And it comes back to the thing of, you know, I'm here, should we not let the next guy here. you know, it's very difficult. We were here when you could count the people. You could look on the west shore of the Indian River in Sebastian, and you could say, the Craigles are home, and Mrs. Sembler's home, and you could count the 9 or 10 there. Today, it's just a globe. You can't tell anything apart. So the problems are not insurmountable, but they're going to take decades. Probably nobody in this room is going to live long enough, maybe these young ones here a little bit, to see the bulk of it done. It's going to take decades to do. It's going to take billions of dollars to do. It's a monumental task, but Brevard County and you folks up here have been really good about stepping out there. Here's our money, and we're doing it. I feel very good with Virginia and her leadership and what she's doing, and she's very good about calling and saying, hey, what do you think about this? And that's the other thing that you just don't have a lot of today. You don't have a lot of the interaction between the regulators and the regulatees, i.e. fishermen, people who live on the water, they've been there all their life, they spend all that time on the water. There used to be a level of communication and relationship there that you don't see today. A lot of it, the perception from the private side, like our side, a lot of it is it's us against them. And that's just not the way it should be. I can't tell you the amount of resources that some of those people still have, and we're getting older, and I'm getting older, that could be providing and helping some of these young folks who are running things and who are developing rules and that are county commissioners today and doing those things. Last thing I'm going to leave you with is when you talk with people and you visit with them around the county, and these young regulators, and they're coming in and giving presentations, I would tell you that, and I told Diane and Barbara in the hallway this, when you choose a physician and he's going to do something major to you, one of the first questions out of my mouth is, how many of these have you done? And if they said, I've done a couple, you probably want to say, I'll get back with you. If you choose a physician, you say, how many of these have you done? And they've done 1,000. That's probably a pretty good person to be talking to. So when you choose somebody and they're talking about the Indian River and they're spending time and they're coming up with rules or this or that, and you say, how many hours do you have on the river? And I'm not talking about, I drove over the bridge and that counts. I'm not talking about, I went to fireworks and that counts, or I read about it and that counts. But 10,000 hours is kind of like a rule of thumb. That's 5 years. That's 2,080 work hours a year. That's a full time. And I'm talking about direct interaction and contact of some sort or fashion. And if you kind of got like at that level of 10,000 hours where you're dealing with it, you've probably got somebody that at least starting to get a really good handle. I've got lots more hours than that, and I learn stuff every day. And it's just through sheer observation. When you're out there, you're looking, and this was taught to me by my father and his father before him and his father before him, and it's all these little things. It's these little things that 99% of the people drive by and they don't see. But that observation is probably about 50% of the science on the Indian River of figuring out why. Why is that happening? Why do those porpoise push their dead ashore right here? Why do these horseshoe crabs go here to die? Why do these dolphin or these porpoise calf in this particular area? All those sorts of things like that, and I can tell you the folks that I've talked to with this new bunch coming behind me, the young ones, not many of them know at all. So I would encourage you to visit with those folks. Nothing's going to get their attention. Poke them, prod them, kind of get them to do something, and maybe someday you'll start seeing some things happen. So I've burned up my 35, a little bit more minutes than I should, so I'll cut her off right there, and I guess let Virginia jump in here and do her part.
Thank you for all of that, Charlie. That's you really set me up for a scary. Who wants to follow that? May I?
You're going to the governor's office. Get ready.
Oh my gosh! I'm gonna steal the laptop and see if I can.
Do you want to do that?
Yeah, because then I can see what's that. Can I steal your pointer?
You want to tell about this? That's your shotgun.
Well, this will be
It's a
entertaining.
shotgun shell pointer. That's a shotgun shell laser pointer.
Excellent.
See there?
Fantastic. Okay.
I brought that to you from the Pirates of any movie.
Okay. All right. So thanks for having me here today, and I want to talk to you about the project plan, which we've just gotten started. And so, you know, all those decades of keen observation that Charlie was talking about, that's lost on most people. What got people's attention was the March 2016 fish kill. When the surface of the water is covered in dead fish and it smells horrible and nobody wants to buy the houses that are for sale, then clearly this is a problem. It's not just a problem to the dead fish, it's a problem to the people. And if those fish are dying, what else is bad in that water, and is there a human health concern? And so we leapt on this occasion, right? Never failed to take advantage of a crisis. We leapt on this situation to say, well, it's not just that fish kill. We've been seeing all these little signs for decades, but for the last 5 years, we've seen big signs that were really hard to ignore. We had an algal superbloom in 2011, the biggest bloom ever seen in the lagoon. That was followed by a brown tide in 2012 and 2013. That brown tide was so bad in 2013 that we had hundreds of mortalities of dolphins, manatees, shorebirds. Also difficult to ignore if you witnessed any of that. We had a little break in 2014, back with a vengeance in 2015 with the brown tide. Throughout all of that time, all those blooms were blocking light. Seagrass is a plant, it needs light to survive. It didn't get light because it was blocked by all that algae in the water column. And so we lost over 60% of our seagrass beds. And in fact, I was at a presentation yesterday, 2016, 2017, they only do aerial flyovers and map all of the seagrass beds every other year. We're still waiting for the 2017 results to come in. But they do a whole bunch of transects at fixed locations annually. And based on those fixed transects, it's looking like we're going to have probably 80% seagrass loss. So we'll see when the analysis comes in. But it's bleak out there. Why is this happening? Well, a lot of reasons. But for many, many decades, we've been putting too much pollution into the lagoon. And so primarily in the form of nitrogen and phosphorus. A little bit of nitrogen and phosphorus is good for you, just like eating is good for you, but when you eat too much, it's bad for you. So too much nitrogen and phosphorus, and the lagoon can't assimilate it all. It can't use it all. And so it's been building up in muck deposits that are smothering the bottom. And as that organic muck breaks down, it releases the nitrogen and phosphorus. As it decays, it releases nitrogen and phosphorus back to the water column. It feeds more algae blooms that compete for oxygen with the fish, that block light to the seagrass. And so eventually we have fish kills, and as the algae blooms die, they sink to the bottom, add to the muck, and this whole cycle starts over. And we're stuck in this repetitive loss situation that's going to spiral downhill. There's nothing that's going to turn this around if we just let it continue to happen. The only way to stop this is to physically go in and change the way that we are behaving, change the way that we are engaging the system. So in developing this plan, we did a little bit of economic analysis. We said if we do nothing, what can we expect? We're going to have more algae blooms, more fish kills. What's that going to do to our economy? So we just looked at 3 aspects of the economy. Of course, our economy is very complicated, but tourism, if we do nothing, we can expect to see, this is in millions of dollars, so this is a $3 billion loss to our economy from tourism and recreation. Property values, if we just look at waterfront property values, people do not want to live next to a dying lagoon. And so those property values are going to decline by 1.2 billion. And commercial fishing, which has already seen many declines, there's not much left of commercial fishing, is going to all but disappear with another 87 million in losses. If you add all of that together, a $4.3 billion decline in our economy. Alternatively, we can try to do something about it. And if we do something about it, and we turn things around, then we'll actually see tourism and recreation grow. by about $1 billion. We'll see property values grow by just under $1 billion, and we could try to recover some commercial fishing. So the difference between a $4.3 billion loss or $2 billion gain is $6.3 billion, and it's a decision point. What is this community worth to us? What do we want to do? And so, we developed a plan, try to turn this around. So I won't spend much time on this because Charlie did a fantastic job, but half of the length of the lagoon is in Brevard County. Because the lagoon is wider up here, most of the water area, the surface area of the lagoon is in Brevard County. And these arrows indicate where the different inlets are. And so all these discharges from Lake Okeechobee that go out the St. Lucie River down here, they work their way mostly out of this inlet, St. Lucie Inlet, and some out of the Fort Pierce Inlet. Virtually none of that Lake Okeechobee water makes its way past Vero Beach. From Vero Beach north is a fairly different system, behaving entirely different, less interaction with the ocean. And because we've got one inlet down here at Sebastian Inlet, and then the next real inlet is way up here at New Smyrna, and all we have in between is the locks, all the pollution that we put in the system, all of the changes that we make to the system, we're stuck with them. They're not getting out to the ocean. This pollution is here, and it's not pollution we can blame on anybody else. It's pollution we put there, but it's also pollution that we could stop putting there. And so if we clean up our act, we have the potential to turn the system around. We don't have to change the federal government's dikes around Lake Okeechobee. We don't have to restore the entire Everglades to succeed. We have to change what we're doing here. So, do we know everything? Absolutely not. Do we know enough to get started? Yes, we do. So we used a process called decision science where we took the best available data, we talked to as many experts as we could grab quickly, and we continue to try to engage with them to address the major sources of pollution. We scheduled some projects in parallel, some of them in series, depending on the sequence that makes sense, the logical sequence that these things need to occur. And all of that is done to try to optimize your return on investment. If we're going to collect more tax dollars from you, in whatever form that is, you want this to be done intelligently. And as we have a dedicated funding source, right, we have more engineers per population than anywhere else. We're going to come up with some new solutions. Once they know there's money to actually implement their bright ideas, those brains are going to be engaged. And so we're looking forward to fostering innovation and new ideas that are going to get us to the finish line faster and more efficiently and less expensively. We wanted to set specific targets. We are not going to get back to what it was in 1910. There's some things that we're not going to be able to undo, but we can get back to a healthy system that provides a lot of the benefits that we find important to us now. And so these science-based targets are the area of seagrass we want recovered, the clarity of the water, the infrequency of algae blooms, the amount of oxygen dissolved in the water so that we have very few fish kills. You should be able to look off a causeway and see clean, sandy sediment that reflects light with a lot of seagrass in between and blue crabs walking around. You should not see black, oozy muck. Right? And filtration, we had an incredible clam fishery here. We had oysters here. You know that from the Indian bins. And we've lost that entire fishery. We've lost most of those critters. We need to put them back so that there is a natural filtration system in the water column helping Mother Nature to filter herself. And like I said, we reached out. We didn't do this in a closet. We reached out to experts in our community and within many agencies to try to pull together the data and information that was available. And certainly, you know, the folks that have been out there on the water that have been watching this, you know, they have a lot more intuition about this than the regulatory hats in Tallahassee or Atlanta. And so it's real important to get a broad perspective on information. So this plan incorporates sort of 4 different kinds of action. One is to reduce the incoming amount of nitrogen and phosphorus, to get the lagoon back on a healthy diet. The other is to remove the excess amounts of nitrogen and phosphorus that have already built up and accumulated in the system and are stuck there in muck deposits. The third aspect is to restore natural filtration. The system is not healthy enough right now for clams. I wish we could do clams. I hope we can someday do clams. Right now, we can't get there. And part of that may be the salinity regime as well as anything else. But oysters, we have done incredibly well with our oyster gardening program. And so we are going to build 20 miles of oyster bars that are going to hold enough oysters to turn over the water column annually. Now that is nowhere near enough for this system, but it should be enough to put enough oysters back in the system that when the males and the females are ready to reproduce, they can find each other, that the gametes can find each other in the water column and we can have successful reproduction. We have not had that for years in this system. Then the fourth thing is respond. If we wrote a plan last year that dictated every single thing that we were going to do, every penny that we were going to spend, that plan would be out of date 6 months, 8 months, 12 months later, and we'd be stuck with it. So we had to have a way that the plan could be adapted and changed and updated as we go. And so we set up a citizen oversight committee to help us with that process. So how do we know how much energy to put into reducing the incoming load of pollutants and how much energy into reducing the amount of muck that's accumulated in the system? And so we looked at the sources of nutrients in the water column. This 1%, so this is nitrogen, this one over here is phosphorus. I love this pointer. This is the best pointer ever. 1% comes from point source discharges. So I know you're reading in the paper about these horrendous releases from wastewater treatment plants, and they're bad and we have to stop them, and we can talk about that later. Nonetheless, they are a small part of the pie. The blue is from atmospheric deposition. We have put so much pollution in the sky that it's raining back down on us and it's raining back down on the lagoon. We enacted some Clean Air Act standards that are helping with that. I hope that this federal government doesn't reverse those. You keep reading about that in the press as well. The green on both of these is surface water runoff and groundwater runoff. It's the pollution that's coming from the land, from us, to the lagoon. And then the black is the nitrogen and phosphorus that is released from the muck on the bottom of the lagoon as it breaks down into graves. So we can continue, as we have been doing since 1990s, to try to reduce the incoming load, to focus on this green part. But if all we do is focus on the green part and ignore the black part, we're ignoring a large part of the equation. So we need to do both. So this plan addresses a list of major sources of pollutants. We're going to try to reduce the amount of fertilizer that people are, the excess use of fertilizer that's contributing nutrients to the lagoon. We're going to look at point sources and reduce the nitrogen and phosphorus concentration in reclaimed water. We're addressing septic systems, we're addressing stormwater, and we're dredging muck. We're not addressing air pollution because that's federally permitted. We really have no jurisdiction over it. And we were not, in the plan, the adopted plan, we weren't taking on sewers. That may change next week. At the time that we wrote the plan, the reason we didn't do that was there was a separate plan for sewers that was adopted back in 2014. So this is a graph from 2014 out to 2033, a 20-year plan to address the failing sewer systems in Brevard County. And you can see that the access here is millions of dollars to be spent. So it was loans front-loaded to do a lot of catch-up in the first 5 years or so on those failing systems. and then keep up with it for the next 20 years. So here we are in the end of 2017, 2018. We've done a lot of this work. Clearly, we still need to do more. And so next week we'll be talking about, what can we do to accelerate this system. But there's a separate funding pot for this through utility fees. And so we didn't think we were going to need to come up with extra money for this, but now I'm thinking maybe we do. So be a part of that conversation. Septic systems. Why did we put in septic systems in the first place? There's a lot of good justification for septic systems. Sewer systems are expensive, and you've got to have this incredible infrastructure to collect all of that sewage, and then you got to have this incredible infrastructure to treat it. And then you've got this giant waste stream that you got to do something with. And so septic systems, when you had one house to the acre, or 5 acres, or 10 acres, you distributed that waste in a big drain field, and you had lots of good, healthy soils. The microbes in that soil ate up that waste, and it really wasn't a problem. But now that we have people on these little postage stamp size lots, wall to wall to wall, and these things are old, and were built over Coquina formations, there's not good soils here. We've got sandy soils, and we got rocky soils. We do not have good organic soils that harbor nitrogen fixing bacteria. And so this is not a great place for septic systems. So we have gone through and prioritized the 60,000 septic systems in Brevard that are over the part of the county that drains, the groundwater drains to the lagoon. And we've looked at the age of the system, the soil type, the depth of groundwater, the density of development, and proximity to the lagoon or some open surface water that connects to the lagoon. We use those criteria to prioritize septic systems for replacing, either hooking them up to sewer or replacing them with new technologies that are still on site but remove 70 to 90% of the nitrogen. So when you look at the 60,000, 59,438 septic tanks in Brevard, there are 15,000 of them that are within 50 meters of an open waterway. And they contribute about 27 pounds apiece on average of nitrogen to the lagoon. And so if you addressed all of them, you'd remove 400,000 pounds of waste, and it would cost you $300 million. Down here, we have another 18,000 that are more than 200 meters from the lagoon, 218 yards from the lagoon. But because of their distance, they contribute 0.0005 pounds apiece. And so you multiply 18,000 times 0.005, you get 10 pounds. You're going to spend another 300 million, but you're only going to get 10 pounds of pollution relief. So definitely makes more sense to focus on these where you're going to get a much bigger benefit. So that's the kind of analysis that we've done, not just with septic systems, but with stormwater, with all the other factors in this plan. We've tried to not tackle the whole problem, but divide it up into where is the biggest bang for the buck. Because as Charlie said, it would cost billions to try to clean up the mess we've made. But we think with a few $100 million, we can make a really big dent in it, and we can begin to turn our economy around. So muck, similarly, these brown patches here are where muck was mapped before the hurricane. The hurricane might have redistributed the muck. I'm thinking we need to go remap it. But probably it's in the deeper, mostly in the deeper areas, and with a little bit of time it'll migrate back to there. So we'll see. But we're not dredging everywhere. We're dredging where there are the biggest, broadest deposits of muck. And so there are multiple reasons to remove that muck. It's bad because it's releasing nutrients into the water column, feeding algae blooms as it decays. But it's also smothering the seagrass, smothering any form of life. We've worked with Florida Tech over the last 2 years, taking samples in mucky deposits and taking samples in sandier deposits in the lagoon. And in the muck, there is nothing living there but sulfur-fixing bacteria. there's no forms of life. Every now and then you find some teeny tiny, smaller than your pinky nail, ostracod or something that probably got dropped by a fish and probably won't be there alive tomorrow, right? The living things are in the seagrass where there's still appropriate habitat. So we need to get this muck out so that we can have that clean, sandy bottom where other things can live. The oyster bars, we didn't know 5 years ago whether the water quality was good enough for oysters. And we thought that, all right, well, close to Sebastian Inlet, they'll probably do okay. As we go north, we're not so sure. And so we started this oyster gardening program. How many oyster gardeners are there? We have oyster, yay, everywhere we have. I knew you looked familiar. We have oyster gardeners all over the county. So we have trained, working with Brevard Zoo, we have trained over 1,000 families. It's about 1,100 families are gardening oysters under their docks, along their seawalls, and reporting information. And so we're finding out where oysters do well. So these green dots are where all of those oyster gardens are located, but we're also finding out where those oysters. It's amazing. They are living nearly everywhere. I mean, except up canal systems where the water is really too fresh. They are surviving, they're thriving, they're growing incredibly quickly, and so they're filtering the water. And then when we collect them, after the gardeners have grown them up to a bigger size where they're less, where predators can't get them as well, we're building oyster bars. And so these oyster bars become these huge locations for filtration, but they also break waves to slow down erosion of the shoreline. And there's nitrogen fixing bacteria under these reefs. The highest denitrification rates measured in any systems in the world have been under oyster reefs. So we're building these habitats for nitrogen fixing bacteria that will help remove excess nitrogen from the lagoon. As I mentioned, we need our plan to be able to grow and change through time. We need citizen oversight to help us do that, and to also let people know what we're doing with your money, whether these projects are on time, whether they're at the cost that we anticipated, how they're performing. Are they really reducing as much pollution as we thought they were? And then if they're not, or if there's new technology, better technology, we need to replace the worst projects in the plan with the best new technology. And so the Citizen Oversight Committee was formed back in October before the November ballot. They've been meeting monthly ever since December, and they're just an incredible group of people representing you. So this is a summary of what was in the adopted plan, how the dollars were distributed between fertilizer management, wastewater treatment upgrades, septic system removal. So this is 40 million of septic to sewer, 22 million of septic upgrades in place, 10 million of stormwater projects, nearly 200 million for muck dredging. It's extremely expensive. 10 million for oysters, and then 10 million to monitor and measure so that we know which projects are performing well and which aren't, and we learn and grow. In order to pass this tax, we needed to put all the dollars in one fund. Normally, if you passed a gas infrastructure sales tax, you have to divide that out between the county and the cities, and the dollars would be all distributed, and it would be hard to implement a uniform plan like this. So we had to go to all of the municipalities and get their buy-in that we were going to work on this together. 77 out of 80 elected officials here voted yes. That allowed us to put it on the ballot to collect $34 million a year with that half penny for 10 years. It sunsets at the end of 10 years. So that gives us $340 million to fund what was initially adopted as a $303 million plan. This is the oversight committee. So people had to apply, and they had to represent certain specialities. So we wanted a good diverse mix of people, not just scientists. And we have members, and then we have alternates. So if the member isn't available, the alternate steps in with voting rights, and we always have a quorum. So far, attendance has been fantastic. They really take this seriously. They take their role important, and they dedicate the time to making this happen. Half of those seats were filled by the League of Cities, right? Because we need the cities to feel engaged in this process. It's not just a county plan. The other half were filled by the county commission. And all of their bios are posted online. We've created a website specifically for the committee. The referendum passed by 62% of the voters, 193,000 people. It's still phenomenal to me. It was approved in every single voting district in Brevard. So how did that happen? One thing is that this is from results from a Pew survey this year, that Floridians prioritize water. Water is, people in Florida understand the importance of water. 83% of them identify water as an important issue. And so that was part of what made this thing resonate. But I think a bigger piece of it, I've hit the wrong button now. Let's try this. Is this incredible sense of place that we have. The Indian River Lagoon is so special, as you just heard. It is full of these phenomena. It's not just a body of water with a couple fish. It's a body of water with these incredible phenomena. These teeming fish, densities you don't see anywhere else. The bioluminescent, dolphins, anytime you go out there, everybody in this room probably has some sense of place, something that binds them to the lagoon, some memory or batch of memories that tells you that this is an incredibly important place. And so we have the benefit of being able to tap into that understanding that you all have the importance of this place. So fiscally, we have a budget. We've just started, the county's just started our new fiscal year, October 1st, and this is a list of all of the projects that are funded to happen this year. We have a number of projects that were completed this year already. Should I go backwards? So your half penny at work, phase 1 of sewer hookup program in Merritt Island was completed. A Long Point Park, way down in the South Beaches, that we ringed a package treatment pond that was oozing half-treated waste out of the pond into the lagoon. We've upgraded that. We have Rockledge has a breeze swept septic to sewer project going on. They've hooked up 104 houses already. The Mims muck dredging project way up in the north end of the county, that contract has been awarded. They were about to get started before the hurricane. They had to demob. Now they're remobilizing, so we should see that work starting very soon. We have 4 more sewer expansion projects that are already in design with consultants on board, getting those projects through permitting. And we have 5 municipalities working on stormwater projects. So a lot already going on and much more to come this year. How can you help? Stay informed, continue to come to talks like this, and then talk to your friends, your neighbors, your family. Make sure that they are informed as well. Support that Citizens Oversight Committee. They are there to be your voice. So reach out to them and make sure they know how you feel about things and what you feel are your priorities. And then in your daily lives, think about what you're doing and what you could do to reduce your footprint on this lagoon. Whether that's washing your car at the car wash, where they capture the wash water and treat it and recycle it, rather than in your driveway where it runs down the driveway and into the storm drain and out to the lagoon, and whether that is full of just nutrients or metals or phosphorus, or even the surfactants in the soap can clog the fish gills, right? That vehicle wash water is so much more damaging than anybody usually talks about. They're keeping your grass clippings out of the street. Don't put your yard waste, right? Driving around after the hurricane, where do people put their yard waste? On top of the storm drain. So as those leaves fall off the branches, they're going into the lagoon. Plus, When it rained 2 weeks later, they were blocking the water that needed to get in, then the neighborhood's flooded. You can't believe the number of phone calls, of flooding that happened because people piled up all their debris on top of the storm drain. So think about what you're doing. Think about how you can reduce your footprint on the lagoon. And then volunteer. There's some fantastic programs out there, whether it's oyster gardening, whether it's cleanups with Keep Brevard Beautiful, mangrove planting with Marine Resources Council, water quality data collection. There's so many groups out there doing great things. We've got a new one, shoot, I'm blanking on the word, but it's a partnership with Marine Resources Council. We're training citizen scientists to help us map where the muck is, and you learn how to go out there in your boat with a probing rod and work on a grid. We've made an app that you can load on your smartphone and report all that data in so that we can keep track of where muck is and isn't, and the progress that we're making and where our next priorities are. So with that, I'm at the end. So we have this vision of success that is a healthy lagoon, but it's not just about that end destination. It's how we get there. It's critically important. It's going to be a long trip. It's going to be at least a decade of hard work. And so all along that way, we have to be taking economically responsible actions. We need to sequence these projects strategically. Everything needs to be science-based and data-driven rather than political. And we need that citizen oversight to provide transparency so we keep everybody on board and keep everybody in the know and move together forward. Forward together. Backwards, upside down. Thank you.
Thank you, Shirley. Thank you, Virginia. Any questions? We'll go backwards.
I just wanted to point out that Virginia has left some really nice information back here. People might want to check before they leave.
Anybody want to see the muck from Turkey Creek? Breaks my heart.
Is there anything I can wash my car with in my driveway that won't hurt?
There are eco-friendly products, and if you drive your car onto the grass, then at least the soap will soak into the grass and into the dirt in your yard and not straight into the gutter and into the storm drain.
But you don't have the name of something that
I do not. But the biodegradable products are and phosphorus free, definitely phosphorus free. But being lazy and going to the commercial car wash, that's actually best for the lagoon.
Go ahead.
How much money is collected by municipalities and the county under the guise of the stormwater fees? Do you have a compilation of what that is in terms of dollars?
I don't know what all the cities raise. I know that our stormwater fee, the county started the stormwater utility in 1990, and the fee was initially adopted at $36. And it stayed flat at $36 all the way until 2014, at which point its buying power was a fraction of what it was when it was adopted 20 years earlier. We increased the fee then to $64 per household. And it didn't leap straight from 36 to 64. It stopped it did two midpoint stops. So last year it made it to $64. That $64 raises just over $6 million a year. This is a $300 million plan. So if we wanted to try to fund a plan like this with $6 million a year, it wouldn't be our grandchildren even seeing success. Yes, ma'am.
I just wanted to thank both of you speakers for such a clear, concise, informative speech.
Yes.
I have a few questions. They used to put devices in front of the sewers to keep all that stuff from going down. I haven't seen them lately. What's going on with that?
Are you talking about like those tube sock things that you see through Melbourne? So those are particularly good at absorbing hydrocarbons, but they don't do much for nitrogen and phosphorus. Usually they're trapping just the hydrocarbons from your car, leaks from cars, and then that water goes into a baffle box, the baffle box is collecting sediment and leaves, but the longer that stuff sits there in the baffle box rotting, the more of that is still released the next time it rains and that water washes. And so we have to do a lot more than that.
I haven't even seen them around lately, and I was just wondering why not. And I thought they were, I didn't know that's what their intent was, but I saw them as blocking all the other garbage from going down so that water could go through.
Right.
And I would think they would make more of an effort to put those out.
We've been installing screens inside our baffle boxes so that we still have those hydrocarbon socks, and we have metal grates that catch the leaves and the litter and keep it floated up above the water column. And I believe the cities have been doing that as well. So they probably are still doing that same treatment. It's just inside the box instead of out there in the street in the curb where you see it.
Right, but I thought they would actually have something to block the limbs and everything else from going in and clogging it up and making those pools
You know,
of
the
water.
problem when you do that is you plug up, you know, the limbs plug up the inlet, and then you have flooding in the street, and then a car hits a puddle and slams into a telephone pole, and somebody gets sued. So, and you know, and people are hurt. So, you tend.
What are you doing with the muck?
Right now, the majority of muck is going out to sod farms. So initially, it goes to a dredge material management area. It's, if you feel the bags back there, it's about 90% water. And so the first thing is to separate the solids from the liquid and put the water back in the lagoon where it belongs. And then the solids are full of organics and nitrogen and phosphorus, stuff that grows plants. And so you've got to get the salt out of it so that it doesn't kill the plants. And Mother Nature does that for free if we just let her rain on it for about 6 months. And then we're trucking it to sod farms, and it's growing the next round of sod.
So you're selling it to the sod farms?
We're not selling it. They are taking it for the cost of the trucking.
Wow.
We're not allowed to sell it, actually, because it's state submerged lands. We have a lease from the state to remove it from the bottom of the lagoon.
You were talking about, what was it, a council of cities? Is that how you put it? Is there a council of counties?
The League of Cities, there's the Indian River Lagoon National Estuary Program has a council that is made up of a commissioner from each of the 5 counties, plus a representative from each of the 2 water management districts, and 1 representative from the Florida Department of Environmental Protection.
As I understood it, Charlie, I think it was, said that Orange County and places like Jacksonville were all relying on the Indian River for fresh water. Is there any way it can be brought to them that they would share some of this cost?
Yeah, I continue to bring that up when there are occasions, right? We have excess fresh water and they need fresh water. The problem is that when we keep more water in the St. Johns River, I mean, where it belongs truthfully, but then it makes its way downstream, north, right? Because the St. Johns River runs north, to Lake Harney too quickly, because of issues like the Kissimmee, where things have been straightened out too much and the time of concentration, the flow path is too quick. And so all those people flood. And so the problem is, how do we get all of that fresh water that we have an excess amount of to the people in Orlando and north to Jacksonville without creating a flooding problem? And it's a real engineering quagmire. But yeah, I would love for the people who need that water to help us pay to get it there.
One more question.
Virginia, it was a very nice presentation. I really enjoyed it. But I have one question. We were looking at one time at land acquisition of buying lowlands and buying areas that you could put back into a hammock or a marsh or running stormwater through the park. I mean, nobody's on the swings in the rain. So that you could, in fact, buy houses and things in areas that were flooding and so forth, and then have land acquisition money available. Is there any of that in your program?
The plan does not include land acquisition, and you know, you're absolutely right. The Endangered Lands Program had an entire Blue Ways project to
We had
acquire.
a land trust.
Right, right.
Which was one of the.
And so we need to get that Endangered Lands Program funded again. And the Forward Forever program that was matching those dollars, we need that funded again. The Land and Water Conservation Program, Amendment 1, you know, those dollars need to go towards fixing these problems, conserving land, restoring water quality, not to running state agencies. But
You could use it, you know, we built the Turkey Creek Sanctuary. We just took the whole hammock, and it's really a big retention pond because the Fort Malabar Bridge holds back a lot of water.
right.
So that it turned out to be the biggest stormwater retention pond in Palm
Right.
Bay.
And, you know, following your lead, Lisa Soto, we have a contract with Marine Resources Council now we're trying to understand the sources of pollution in groundwater. And so Turkey Creek Sanctuary is our control area. What are the water, nitrogen and phosphorus concentrations in the groundwater in a sanctuary that's not getting all this pollution? And they are barely detectable. The levels are so low. It's incredibly beautiful, you know, what you can do through conservation, like what
That would
Diane
just,
read.
I mean, that.
And then across the street, in the reuse area, you know, with sewer, the concentrations are, you know, 12 milligrams per liter. We need more land acquisition, but it's not in this plan.